Hello and welcome to PolyCosm. My name's Christina and we've finally reached the end of our Nurbek series. It's time to wrap up the concept for our pitch, and in this video we'll be reprojecting the Photoshop paintovers that Reinhardt did in the previous video back onto the 3D models in our swamp scene, add in some fireflies in both Nurbek's lantern and to the scene for atmospheric effect, add in the UI that Reinhardt has painted over, and render out the final animation as part of our hypothetical isometric game pitch. Let's get to it. Right, so I've covered reprojecting textures in the first design principles video that we did, so if you're unsure of how to do that, I definitely recommend checking that out. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. You jump into the camera view you rendered the 3D assets from, choose an asset or a group of assets, head into edit mode, and by pressing U for unwrap, you can choose project from view. To make the textures look better, let's turn down the specular and up the roughness. I'll repeat this process for the rest of the models, but before then I want to change the water texture as that was done a bit differently. Instead of projecting, we chose to just paint over the original swampy water texture that came with the model, which looks like this, and made it look more painterly. In the shader editor, all we need to do is just change out the albedo texture, which is usually at the top of these shader setups, and choose our new hand-painted texture. Done. I'll jump forward to show how the scene looks with the projected textures on top. Here we are. Let's zoom in and have a look around. As you can see, the texture feels more like they belong together and have a sort of stylized look to them. Of course, we could push this much farther and go more stylized route, but we chose something a bit more subtle for our concept pitch. Here's a side-by-side comparison so you can get an idea of how a paintover like this can improve things. The only downside with this method is that you're projecting from a camera view, so you're somewhat limiting the range of motion for the camera. If we were to turn the camera, we'd start seeing some artifacting from the areas we haven't painted over due to the camera obviously not reaching these places. Hopefully that makes sense. Since this is an isometric shot though, we can move the camera up and down, left and right, and it won't affect the textures since we won't really be seeing things in perspective. Obviously, if we move the camera outside of our original bounds, which is the area you're seeing on screen right now, we'd start seeing some of those artifacts. That's why I chose to kind of zoom out and cover as much ground as possible to give our camera some room to move up and down this road without any artifacts popping up. And speaking of camera movements, that's exactly what I started working on next. The only values I really need to care about was keyframing the Shift X and Shift Y locations under the camera properties. The way you do that is bring up the timeline at the bottom, go to keyframe 1 and either hover over the values and press I, or press the little dot next to the values. Move forward in the timeline, choose your new values and repeat the last step. Scrub in between the two and you've got some camera animation going. Also, if you select both of the keyframes, you can press V and choose to make the animation linear through vector, or use some of the other options for something a bit smoother transition-wise. You can also Ctrl E choose to ease in, out, and so on. This is the animation I ended up with. It's a bit too stiff in my opinion, but I think it works as just like a preliminary animation for our concept pitch. I wanted the camera to kind of follow Nurbek and slow down whenever he slowed down. Right, next step is to add the long-awaited fireflies. Our concept was that these fireflies are collected by Nurbek and held in his lantern. This is how he lights up the way for the caravan, and he can also open the grid at the top using his staff to use the fireflies as a weapon against anything he encounters down this swampy road. I watched a few tutorials on how to create some fireflies using particles, so if you're interested in that sort of thing, definitely check out these videos. I'll also link to them in the description, by the way. Also, I watched some of Ian Hubert's Patreon tutorials, and honestly, if you're into special effects, mocap, rigging, projection mapping, and so on, you should 100% support him on there. Most of what I've been doing throughout this entire project is honestly what I learned from Ian. He is a freaking beast and a huge inspiration to me. When I grow up, I want to be just like him. Okay, so I'm after two types of effects. One where the fireflies are contained inside of the lantern and moving along with it, and the second one is just having them scattered throughout the entire scene. What I tried to do for the first effect was to sort of fake the fireflies inside of the lantern, not only to save memory and make rendering this animation faster, but to keep this effect more contained within the lantern, if that makes sense. I tried doing this with particle effects, but the fireflies kept escaping the lantern despite putting a collision object around them. So instead I decided to create a shader texture setup using noise, make it glow, and then just keyframe the location from the start of the animation till the end of the animation. In no way did it end up being perfect, but it's just a quick and dirty way, you know? As for the second effect, I pretty much follow the tutorial but scatter these throughout the entire scene instead. As you can see, the particle system covers a much larger range. Alright, let's see what we've got, as well as the rest of the other concepts we created for this series. Talk to you in a bit. Yeah, we're done. We didn't get as much done as we wanted, but overall we accomplished most of what we set out to do. Omrijan and I feel super ready to wrap up this project, so if you're interested in hearing our thoughts on the final outcome, how the project went, what we learned throughout this entire process, and what to expect next, definitely check out our afterthoughts video, which should be out real soon. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and being on this long journey with us. We hope you learned a lot and are just as excited as we are to start a new project. Bye, guys.